She fined my neighbor for overly enthusiastic Halloween vibe. She banned wind chimes because they disrupted emotional harmony. She rewrote the neighborhood map and added my house without telling me. Her name was Karen. She ruled with a clipboard and a polyester fist. But then she stepped into my garage, and I had cameras. If you had told me 2 months ago that buying my dream home would lead to discovering $280,000 0-cents trucks parked in my garage, I'd have laughed, mostly because I didn't even live inside an HOA. But that didn't stop Maple Hollow from trying to make me part of their weird suburban cult. After years of renting apartments where the hot water came and went like bad moods, I finally closed on a 3-bedroom ranch just outside Portland, Oregon. Big backyard, wide driveway, and most importantly, outside the dreaded boundaries of the Maple Hollow Estates HOA. The real estate agent practically high-fived me on closing day. "This one's free range," she said, tapping the survey map. "No HOA, no newsletters, no unsolicited clipboard visits." I believed her. I should have asked for that in writing. The first few weeks were everything I dreamed of. I painted my front door forest green, offensive to someone, I'm sure, and planted 3 heirloom fruit trees in the backyard like I was starting a post-apocalyptic orchard. The neighbors seemed friendly in that wave but don't linger way. Then came the welcome flyer, folded neatly on my doormat, printed on thick glossy paper with a pine cone watermark. "Welcome to our transitional zone." In bold serif font beneath that, "Guidelines for border properties." Border properties, the flyer detailed rules about mailbox dimensions, hedge heights, and approved driveway stains. I skimmed, laughed, tossed it in the recycling. Maybe some other guy named Dylan just moved in. But Maple Hollow wasn't kidding. 3 days later, my neighbor, gray polo, clipboard, sunglasses on a cloudy day, stopped by to introduce himself and ask if I'd considered conforming my trash bins to the neighborhood's visual harmony standards. I responded the only way a reasonable person should, with a blank stare and a polite but terminal no. That's when he said it. "You're in the transitional zone. Karen will probably be in touch soon." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. That name came with capital letters and a sense of foreboding. Apparently, Karen wasn't just a stereotype here. She was a real person. A walking municipal violation in slacks. And sure enough, it happened on a Thursday. Sky was blue, sun was out, I had groceries in hand. I tapped the garage opener on my key fob, expecting to see my sad little Honda park comfortably alone, and nearly dropped the milk. 2 massive trucks, Ford Raptors, matte black with lifted suspensions and custom wheels, sat snug in my garage like they'd paid rent. My Civic had been exiled to the driveway, looking like a folding chair at a monster truck rally. At first, I thought I'd opened the wrong garage. Then I saw the boxes I hadn't unpacked. My old speaker system, my college futon pushed to the corner like afterthoughts. Someone had moved my stuff. My hands were shaking as I opened the security app on my phone, and there she was. A woman in a crisp white blouse, khaki so aggressively pressed they could cut glass, walking up my driveway with purpose. She held a small remote, aimed it at the garage, and smiled as the door creaked open. 2 trucks rumbled in moments later, directed by her hand like she was working airport ground control. She patted one of the hoods and strutted off like she'd just done a public service. Her name badge caught the sunlight for a split second. "Karen Greystone, President, Maple Hollow HOA." I stood frozen in my driveway watching 2 strangers' luxury vehicles take up residence in my garage, like my house had been casually annexed. I'd seen enough mafia movies to know when someone was marking their territory, only in this case the mob wore loafers and carried laminated bylaws. I didn't even bother unloading the groceries. I drove straight to the Maple Hollow Clubhouse, a building so smugly symmetrical it looked like it judged you for parallel parking. Inside, everything reeked of citrus cleaner and ego. I found Karen Greystone seated behind a wide oak desk, her posture immaculate, a framed certificate behind her labeled Community Leadership Excellence Self-Nominated. She didn't look up as I entered. "Mr. Hart," she said, already flipping through a file, "you're right on time. I hadn't made an appointment. I hadn't called ahead." But Karen somehow knew. I launched into it. Garage, the trucks, the remote, the invasion of privacy. She listened with the serene disinterest of someone watching a fly bounce off a window. Those vehicles belong to guests of the HOA's annual showcase weekend, she said, folding her hands like a sitcom principal. We can't have them cluttering our streets during guided tours. Your garage offered a convenient, if underutilized, alternative. I stared at her. You mean my private property? She tilted her head like I'd misunderstood a perfectly logical policy. Mr. Hart, your address falls within the HOA's transitional buffer zone. Your home is part of our future cohesion strategy. You'll be formally integrated soon. This is just a temporary measure. I laughed. She didn't. I'm not in your HOA, I said. My deed, my survey, everything says I'm outside your jurisdiction. Karen smiled, that frost-tipped expression that says she's already called her lawyer and her dry cleaner. Boundaries evolve, Mr. Hart. Our Community Improvement Committee filed an annexation motion last year. Administrative processing takes time. Meanwhile, it's in everyone's best interest that you begin aligning with community standards. She slid a brochure across the table. Section 12, paragraph 3, all exterior doors must be within the approved neutral palette. Forest green is not compliant. She tapped the image of a beige color swatch like it was gospel. I took the brochure and walked out before I could say something that might get me arrested. When I got home, the trucks were gone, but my mailbox now held a welcome packet from Maple Hollow Estates. Inside, 147 pages of regulations, a calendar of mandatory events, and a notice that my first community contribution of $450.00 was due within 30 days, labeled security parking fee. There was even a small sticky note attached. This is your opportunity to become part of something greater. Don't resist the flow. It was initialed with a tiny KG. The next morning, I found a neon SORN citation duct taped to my fence. Unauthorized tree selection, Article 8.3. Apparently, my apple sapling was considered pest attracting and inconsistent with aesthetic unity. I stood there in my robe, coffee going cold, staring at my fruit tree like it had betrayed me. That's when I noticed the second violation notice hanging from my door handle. Improper paint tone, Article 5.1. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I started to suspect this wasn't about community standards at all. This was a hostile takeover disguised as neighborly concern. But what exactly was Karen after? Why target my house so aggressively when I wasn't even on her map? I didn't have the answer yet, but something told me I was about to find out. I thought calling the police might bring some sanity back into the situation. After all, someone had broken into my garage, moved my belongings, and issued fake fines. Surely that was worth at least a raised eyebrow. Officer Sandoval showed up in a patrol car that looked more tired than he did after hearing my story and watching the security footage of Karen operating my garage like it was part of a suburban air traffic tower. He gave a long sigh and scratched his chin. And technically, he said, this falls under a civil dispute. HOA boundaries and property claims are murky. I blinked. So you're saying she can break into my house as long as she calls it community planning? He gave a shrug that should have been framed and hung in a DMV. Unless she stole something or damaged property, it's a matter for lawyers. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting a neighbor with control issues. I was up against an entire system designed to shrug at the absurd. Frustrated and furious, I started knocking on doors, hoping someone else had stood up to Karen and lived to tell the tale. My first stop was the Jacksons, a quiet couple across the street who always had perfectly edged lawns and Christmas decorations that looked like they'd been designed by an engineer with OCD. Mark Jackson invited me in with the wary smile of a man who knew exactly what I was about to say. She's already started with you, he asked, handing me a beer at 11 a.m. Took her 2 weeks to show up on our porch when we moved in. Said our hedges were too chaotic. We thought she was kidding. She wasn't. Turns out Karen had been running her HOA like a petty dictatorship for over a decade. The board was mostly hand-picked allies. Anyone who questioned her either got buried in violation notices or mysteriously excluded from community functions, which sounded a lot like junior high lunch tables, but with more passive aggression. I met others, too, people who had been fined for parking slightly angular in their own driveways, for planting non-harmonious succulents, and even one poor guy who got a notice for irregular curtain symmetry. And then there was Lily, 10 years old, sharp as a tack, and apparently a one-girl resistance movement. She lived 2 houses down and wandered over while I was talking to her mom in their front yard. You know, she fined us for Christmas socks, she announced, swinging her backpack onto their porch swing. We hung too many on the porch. Said it created holiday clutter. We had to pay $75 or take them down. I blinked. You mean stockings? No, Lily said. Actual socks. We ran out of room inside. As ridiculous as it all sounded, the pattern was obvious. Karen thrived on exhaustion. She didn't need to be right. She just needed you to be too tired, too busy, or too polite to push back. It wasn't about rules. It was about submission disguised as order. But the more I listened, the more something didn't add up. Why go through all this trouble for one street? Why bend laws and send fake bills just to keep people in line? Karen wasn't just power tripping. She was investing effort, resources, and time, which meant she wasn't just enforcing standards. She was building something. But what? And why did my house feel like ground zero? The more I asked questions, the quieter the neighborhood got. Some folks gave me nervous glances over trimmed hedges. Others whispered their support but refused to go on record. That's when the first HOA newsletter arrived. A slick, full-color pamphlet left in every mailbox, including mine. The headline across the front read, "Defending Maple Hollow, Preserving Community Standards Against Outside Disruption." Below it, a photo of my green front door, zoomed in and heavily filtered to look radioactive. I flipped to the second page and found myself described, not by name, but as a non-compliant newcomer, undermining neighborhood integrity with blatant disregard for aesthetic unity. Apparently, I was now the problem. Karen had turned me into a pariah in khakis. It got worse. A week later, my doorbell camera pinged while I was working. I checked the feed and saw 2 HOA volunteers, clipboard in one hand, walkie-talkie in the other, flagging down a delivery van outside my property. The driver looked confused as they spoke to him, gesturing toward my house like it was a known crime scene. One of them actually took the box out of his hand, scribbled something on it, and slapped a bright red sticker across the top that read, "Subject to HOA inspection, pending integration zone." By the time I got outside, they were gone, and the package was sitting neatly on my welcome mat, open re-tape with all the care of a TSA luggage check. Inside, a set of smart light bulbs and a hand-signed note from my sister that read, "Hope your new home is brighter than your old one." The irony was almost poetic. I brought it up at the next HOA meeting, open to interested parties, which apparently included me now that I was being publicly shamed. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, flanked by her loyal board members in matching polos. When I confronted her about the intercepted delivery, she didn't blink. "Mr. Hart, the community has a vested interest in ensuring that all incoming materials meet safety and compliance standards," she said, smiling like she was explaining fire safety to a toddler. "Your property's transitional status allows us to enforce provisional oversight. We simply cannot have rogue installations affecting power grids or curb appeal." I could practically hear my blood boiling. That night, I received a forwarded email from one of the less devoted HOA members, someone I'd spoken to briefly after the meeting. It was Karen's campaign launch announcement. Apparently, she was running for county council, and Maple Hollow was her launch pad. The email included bullet points highlighting her accomplishments as HOA president. Reduced crime rates, dubious, increased property values, unverified, and model neighborhood transformation. Attached were high-res photos of homes she claimed credit for beautifying, including mine, my house, my paint, my trees, presented as a shining example of HOA-guided success. She'd even captioned the image, "A transitional property brought into harmony under strong leadership." I hadn't even joined, and somehow I'd become a political prop. That was the moment it clicked. Karen didn't just want control, she needed it to build a narrative. Maple Hollow wasn't just a neighborhood to her, it was a billboard. Every regulation, every citation, every smile hiding a dagger was part of a polished portfolio she was crafting for her next step up the power ladder. And my resistance, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was off menu, which meant she'd do everything she could to erase it or bury it under layers of carefully crafted propaganda. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was up against someone who'd made erasing me part of her brand. The only question now was, how far would she go? The morning after discovering my house had become Karen's campaign wallpaper, I marched down to the hardware store and bought the biggest aluminum sign they had. I spent the afternoon hammering it into the edge of my lawn just beside the sidewalk, professionally printed in bold block letters. See my why, subject to HOA regulations. Underneath, smaller print read, violators will be filmed. Karen, this means you. It was petty, sure, but it felt righteous, and for the first time in weeks, I had neighbors slowing down to give me a thumbs up instead of crossing the street. Karen responded in record time. By the following afternoon, a new HOA initiative appeared on the Maple Hollow Bulletin, the Community Safety Monitoring Program. That same day, 4 residents in navy blue polos with HOA logos began walking slow, synchronized laps around my block, clipboard in hand. One of them actually crouched near my mailbox to measure the height of my house numbers. Another took photos of my fence while muttering into a walkie-talkie. They weren't technically trespassing, they stayed on the sidewalk. But the message was clear. I was now under surveillance. Constant, neighbor-prepared, khaki-clad surveillance. If it weren't so creepy, it might have made a great parody of The Truman Show. Instead of losing my mind, I opened Excel. I called the file Karen Files, and it quickly became my personal holy war. Every incident got a timestamp, screenshot, video file, and category. Clipboard Patrol, 11:07 a.m. Ian stood outside for 6 minutes, took 12 photos. Violation notice, 7 non-regulation, tree mulch color. Pamela, HOA Vice, recorded sniffing my garbage can. It was absurd, but also airtight. I started syncing it all to cloud backup. If I was going down, I'd take her HOA empire with me, cell by cell. That's when I met Melissa. She was new to the neighborhood, rented the yellow Craftsman 3 houses down. I hadn't seen her much beyond a wave here or there. One evening while I was watering my battered apple tree, she walked over holding a binder thick enough to stun a burglar. "You're the guy with the signs," she said, "and the security cameras." I nodded, warily. "Melissa Lang. I'm a real estate attorney. I've been reviewing my property documents. You're not crazy. Karen is using fraudulent boundary amendments." My jaw may have audibly clicked open. She flipped the binder to a printed map, one that showed the official recorded plat of Maple Hollow. "You're here?" She pointed officially outside their jurisdiction. "But Karen submitted a proposed amendment 3 years ago that was never approved. She's been acting like it passed ever since. Classic paper trail manipulation." Suddenly, everything made sense. The flyers, the fines, the newsletters using suggestive language like pending integration. Karen wasn't just aggressive, she was strategic. She'd created an artificial narrative using unofficial documents and half-truths to make people believe they were already under her thumb. And most terrifying, it was working. The psychological pressure, the illusion of inevitability, it made even smart people roll over just to get some peace. Melissa closed the binder. What she's doing isn't just unethical. It might be fraud. I stared at the growing list in my Karen files, now armed with a legal ally and an actual map. For the first time, felt like I wasn't just defending my house. I was preparing to expose a system. The only question was, how many people would we have to wake up to do it? Melissa's discovery changed everything. Up until that point, I'd been playing defense, swatting at HOA notices and dodging clipboard commandos like a rogue squirrel in suburbia. But now we had grounds for offense. Real, documented, potentially illegal grounds. So we dug deeper. Melissa had a contact inside the county records office, someone willing to discreetly flag documents connected to Maple Hollow. That's how we got access to a string of financial records tied to a company I'd never heard of, Civic Harmony, Inc. The name sounded innocent enough, like a nonprofit organizing sing-alongs in public parks. But a closer look told another story. Civic Harmony, Inc. wasn't a nonprofit. It was an LLC, registered under a P.O. box in the next county over. And its listed officers, Karen Greystone and a man named Russell Dean, who turned out to be her husband's law partner. According to the HOA's public statements, all event parking fees during Maple Hollow's showcase weekends went into community improvement funds. But the routing numbers on the bank deposits showed a different destination. Payments were being funneled directly to Civic Harmony, Inc. Melissa ran a forensic trace. Over the past 2 years alone, the HOA had collected nearly $32,000, 0 cents, in VIP parking fees, most of which ended up in Civic Harmony's account. and not 1 cent showed up on the HOA's official financial reports. The scam was simple, shameless, and slick, claimed that neighborhood events require off-street parking, charge out-of-towners a premium to park securely, and use random private garages, like mine, as impromptu storage units, then quietly sweep the money into a company no one would think to question. But now we had proof. It was time to take the fight public. I bought a domain that night, exposemaplecaren.com. The homepage featured a banner of my infamous not HOA property sign and a rotating slideshow of surveillance skills, Karen with her remote opener, Pamela measuring my mailbox with a literal tape measure, HOA patrol members photographing my trash cans. Each image linked to a corresponding case file, timestamps, incident notes, legal context. Melissa helped write blog entries breaking down the legal discrepancies, what Karen said the rules were versus what the law actually allowed. We uploaded PDF scans of the false boundary amendment, financial spreadsheets from Civic Harmony, and even an anonymized testimony from a former board member who claimed Karen used HOA funds to cater her son's graduation party because it promoted neighborhood pride. Within a week, the site had over 2,000 unique visitors, most of them local, judging by the surge in HOM meeting RSVPs. But the real viral moment came when Greg, yes, Clipboard Greg, sent me a clip from his garage camera. At first, I thought it was more footage of leaf blower violations. But no, it was something better. The video showed Karen in full athleisure gear dragging a 100-foot orange extension cord from the clubhouse exterior outlet across the sidewalk, over a low fence, and into her own backyard. Seconds later, a string of pastel fairy lights blinked on, illuminating a massive balloon arch that read, "Happy 60th, Richard," accompanied by blaring yacht rock from professionally rigged speakers. According to the HOA budget, those utilities were billed as Clubhouse Holiday Reserve Testing. That clip went straight to the homepage under the title Power Trip When Karen Lights Up the Night on Your Dime. It was hilarious, it was damning, and most importantly, it was shareable. Residents started whispering. Some started posting. A few even emailed the site with their own stories, like the woman who was fined for her Halloween skeleton display lacking thematic cohesion. But what mattered most wasn't the stories, it was the shift. Karen's control was built on silence, shame, and paperwork confusion. But now, her empire had a URL. The only question was, how long could she keep the narrative from unraveling when the entire neighborhood was watching it burn? Once the video of Karen's Power Pilfer party made its rounds, the silence in Maple Hollow cracked. Not exploded, just cracked. A few neighbors still avoided eye contact, but more started nodding at me in the mornings, a few whispering, "Nice website," like they were complimenting a homemade bomb. For the first time, the control Karen held over this neighborhood was starting to loosen. Melissa and I knew we had to strike while the HOA's PR armor was dented. So we drafted a formal complaint, complete with annotated evidence, timestamp citations, maps, and financial ledgers, and filed it with both the County Real Estate Commission and the Office of Local Governance. We weren't accusing Karen of being annoying. We were accusing her of running a fraudulent operation using public trust and private money. Within a week, the Maple Hollow HOA announced an emergency transparency forum via their usual glossy newsletter, printed, ironically, with community funds. It was clearly a damage control stunt, but we didn't care. We showed up with flash drives, printed packets, and 3 poster boards labeled boundaries, banking, and BSIs. I'd expected pushback, maybe even another attempt at dismissal, but as we walked into the clubhouse, I noticed something different. People were already seated, not just seated, but waiting, murmuring, watching. Several clutched their own copies of our printed evidence. Greg gave me a nod from the back, arms crossed over his I Heart Maple Hollow hoodie, like it had just become protest gear. Karen opened the meeting with her usual polished condescension, speaking in that HOA queen tone she'd perfected over a decade of faux diplomacy. "It's important during these challenging times," she began, "that we remember the value of unity and proper decorum." I waited exactly 3 minutes before stepping forward and calmly placing a flash drive on the projector console. "Let's test the value of transparency," I said. Then I clicked play. What followed wasn't some dramatic courtroom montage. It was better. It was death by detail. Footage of HOA patrols harassing delivery drivers. side-by-side comparisons of the fake boundary map and the county's legal plat, screenshots of Civic Harmony's financial transfers, testimonies from residents who'd been fined for things like mismatched doormats and non-harmonious Halloween vibes, and, of course, the grand finale, the video of Karen stealing electricity via a neon orange cord to power an inflatable champagne bottle arch for her husband's backyard birthday bash. The room was silent, but not stunned, focused, like a jury slowly realizing the defendant is guilty, and kind of tacky. Karen rose, face tight, voice clipped. "This meeting is being hijacked by individuals with personal grievances and misinformation. I move to adjourn." But before she could slam her little HOA gavel, a voice from the back cut her off. "Motion denied," said Eleanor Bradshaw, a retired CPA and one of the original homeowners. "Not until you explain this." She walked to the front, holding up a printed invoice with a maple hollow letterhead. "This is a reimbursement request approved and signed by you for a custom outdoor patio heater system installed at your property and paid out of HOA discretionary improvement funds." She turned to the room. "Karen used our dues to keep her dogs warm." That did it. The crowd didn't erupt. It turned quietly, collectively. Whispers turned into questions, questions into confrontations. Karen stood frozen behind the podium, face draining, her carefully curated composure cracking like laminate under a hot pan. Richard, her husband, tried to interject, but was met with audible groans and a pointed, "You should sit down," from the crowd. One by one, neighbors stood up, not to scream, but to share stories, documents, screenshots, receipts. It wasn't just my fight anymore. The HOA had bullied too many for too long. Now it was facing an audit from its own people. Melissa leaned in. "This is the tipping point," she whispered. "You feel that?" I did. For the first time since moving in, it wasn't just me and a few angry spreadsheets. It was us, an entire neighborhood, quietly discovering that compliance was optional when the rules were fake. Karen had built a regime on paperwork, intimidation, and power polo, but now she was being dismantled by clipboards she didn't control. And while the meeting ended with her storming out, it wasn't over, because Councilwoman Davis, who no one expected to be there, stood up at the end and said, "I've seen enough. This is going to committee." What committee? What authority? Karen's face said it all. This time, someone higher up was watching. But the biggest blow was still waiting, because what Greg pulled from his cloud cam the next morning, that was something even Karen couldn't redact. Sometimes all it takes to bring down a tyrant is a spreadsheet, a sign with attitude, and a community finally done with beige oppression. This wasn't just a fight over a garage or a fruit tree. It was about drawing a line and daring someone to cross it. Karen thought she could weaponize rules, paperwork, and fear. But in the end, she underestimated the one thing she couldn't regulate: people who finally give a damn. So if you're dealing with your own HOA whore, clipboard crusader, or suburban overlord, document everything, stand your ground, and maybe plant a tree while you're at it, because roots grow deeper when watered with resistance. Now tell us, what's the wildest HOA rule you've ever seen? Drop it in the comments, like the video if you've ever had a Karen on your lawn, and hit subscribe for more stories of justice served with sarcasm.